Happy Friday and welcome to our webinar. We are so glad you joined us today. Logistic online will be muted. Please post your question in the webinar chat. For those of you who could not join us today, we hope you will enjoy replay. We will post recording on apexinjava.com as well as our YouTube channel. Please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to know more about upcoming webinars. We have sessions scheduled for July and August. We are still looking for speakers for September and forward. If you have used one of Apex's application which helped you or your customer, or you develop one, please reach out to us and we would love to have you on our webinar. Thanks to our sponsors on Backup, Form Assembly and Metazoa. Without their help, it was not possible to bring this event at a free of cost. Submit your entry on apexinjava.com. As I said earlier, if you have developed one applications or if you use any application in the past which you think, oh, Hana, our customer will get benefited, please do submit your entry. Here is your co-host, Monira Majmundar. She is a Salesforce consultant. And Rakesh Gupta, me. And with that said, I'm going to hand over the session to Tom Appleton. Tom is from Metazoa, and we are thrilled to have Metazoa in our kickoff webinar. Tom, to you.
Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about managing profiles and permission sets with our tool that's on the App Exchange called Snapshot. And so let's talk a little bit first about profiles and permission sets and some of the problems and ins and outs with them. And then we're going to talk about how a customer of ours, we're going to use them as an example, used our tool Snapshot to really kind of tackle these problems. So most people on here probably understand what profiles are, right? They control what users can see and do inside of your Salesforce org. So, this covers a lot of bases, your access to Apex, your application visibility, your field permissions, your object permissions, tab visibility, everything. So, it's really the fundamental building block of how users interact with your Salesforce org. But there's some issues with them. So one issue is that, there's a ton of permissions all bundled into one piece. There's very limited assignment options. You're either part of a profile or you're not, and you can only be a part of one. All right. They generate huge amounts of metadata. So if you're trying to deploy profiles, just to give you an example, if you had 1,000 objects in your org, say you had a big Fortune 500 sized org, you had 1,000 objects with 500 profiles and maybe 500 fields on each object, that would generate 250 million pieces of metadata entries. So just to show you, that's massively complex, and understanding that and dealing with it can be really, really tough. So also, lots of profiles are based off user complaints. So this is really the story that we're going to sort of show you how this customer today, how they used our tool to manage the problem. This is really a big problem for them. Back in the day, there weren't permission sets or permission set groups yet. So every time a user needed a new piece of security for a profile, they duplicated the profile, changed the security, and assigned that user to it. And what that meant was, over time, they had way too many profiles, right? And that's really the last one there, profiles because of exceptions. So everyone kind of probably understands how this works, but when one user needs a new permission, right, from a profile, there's a tendency to duplicate that profile and assign the user to it. Now you have a one-to-one relationship with a user and a profile, right? Or you could change the permission on the profile itself, but then, of course, you're granting that permission to everybody who's in your org or who is assigned to that particular profile. So that's why Salesforce came up with permission sets. So permission sets are kind of like miniature, or what you would maybe say sparse profiles, okay? So they contain a lot of the security that's in a profile, but they're not a replacement for a profile. They don't have login hours. They don't have layout assignments. There's lots of things that exist in a profile that aren't in a permission set. So while they do handle security, they are not a replacement for profiles. Okay. So now every user has a base profile, and if a user has an exception, they can be assigned a permission set to grant that privilege, and they can stay in that same base profile, right? So there are a few problems with permission sets, right? They're mainly good for exceptions, right? This person needs this one security setting that the rest of the profile doesn't. They're not a replacement for profiles, like we said. They can require lots of user assignments, which can make them really complex. But of course, Salesforce has recently released a solution to help with those, and that is what we call permission set groups. So now a user can have a profile, and they could be assigned to a permission set for an exception, but they could also be assigned to a group of permission sets using permission set groups. Okay? So this is sort of just laying out the structure for everyone of where we are with security and profiles and permission sets. So this is sort of a slide of where Salesforce wants people to be for their profiles and their permission sets, right? You've got Bob, and Bob's part of the marketing profile here. And, maybe Bob is also part of the advertising team. So we've assigned him to a permission set group with some permissions for advertising. But Bob maybe also needs a one-off permission for Einstein, which would be his own permission set that might be outside of a group. So this is sort of a diagram of how Bob's security is laid out, and we can kind of look at it and understand it. And this is really the methodology that Salesforce wants implemented for security using profiles, permission sets, and permission set groups. So the question is, how do you get there? So a lot of people have had older orgs especially, they're very complex, and they need to get to this ideal methodology, but getting there can be very tough. So you could start over from scratch. That's probably not an option for most people. You could adopt, the proper nomenclature, Salesforce and corporate. You could start moving permissions out of profiles, gradually transition to groups. These are all sort of the techniques that we're going to show you with our tool that you can do. So one of those things would, of course, be to merge similar profiles, right? You want to take profiles that are similar and merge them, and then fill in the gaps with permission sets. But of course, then permission sets can become very complex. So then you can try to organize those with permission set groups. So let's talk a little bit about a customer that we recently signed. They're a Fortune 500 customer, and they had about 500 profiles. And these were done over time. Their org was old, so a lot of them were created back before there were permission sets, and certainly all of them before there were permission set groups. Now there were new administrators taking over the org, and it was so complex that they couldn't even understand it. So the first step to fixing these problems and doing these techniques to move to this better methodology is you have to understand your security. And it was so complex that they really could not really understand it. So that's where our tool Snapshot came into play. So Snapshot is a complete org management tool. We started as a release management tool, and to this day, we still have what we believe are the best release management tool out there. But over time, we really grew to cover a lot more area. So we now also do relational data migration. So you can, move data and maintain all the relationships between any Salesforce orgs. We have comprehensive org documentation, data dictionaries, and different ways to document the structure of your org. What we're focusing on today and what we've highlighted here are our suite of profile and permission set management tools. We have, I believe, the most comprehensive set of tools for managing profiles and permission sets built into Snapshot. And we'll get those in detail today. And then we also have a suite of tools that do org optimization and cleanup. We have a custom algorithm for every metadata type, and we analyze it, and then we can tell you what's not technical debt. You're moving to Lightning. You need to clean up your org. We really focus on that as well. So all of that together comes from a single UI, and it's really a complete org management tool that's really comprehensive. So with that, let's jump over and take a look. So today we're really going to focus on the profile and permission set piece. And we're doing that because, obviously this is a very deep and comprehensive tool, and going through all of it would take quite a bit of time. So today that's really going to be our focus, because we think that's also something unique. You won't see any other release management tools with a focus here. And I don't think there's really, except in a piecemealed way, too many other tools to really do a lot of these things. So something that we really wanted to highlight for everybody today. We're going to get you a little bit oriented to what you're seeing here, and then we're going to dive in. So this is our workspace manager. This is essentially a DevOps pipeline, or a release management pipeline that we've created with drag and drop. We have a palette here where we can drag and drop and create these, and these could be as complex or as simple as you need them to be for your environment. And just to orient you to what you're seeing, blue icons are connections to Salesforce Orgs. So that could be any kind of org: production, sandbox, developer, Salesforce DX, doesn't really matter. These green icons are connections to code repositories. So we could connect to any type of Git, any flavor of Git, and you could both push and pull metadata between orgs and repos. So if you have developers putting, releases into a Git repo, we can work with those as well. And then everything's connected up with what we call deploy arrows. And all of these arrows could be set up with continuous integration or automation if you had need to do so. So again, this is a pretty robust looking pipeline, but we're actually going to jump in and look at a little bit simpler of a view to deal with our profiles and permission sets today. So I'm going to switch over to another workspace here. And this one's pretty simple. We've got a sandbox, a staging org, and a production org. So pretty simple layout here. And again, the fundamental step to dealing with your profiles and permission sets, or doing really anything that's done with our tool, is you got to back up the metadata for the org. The metadata is what contains all that information about security, and of course the whole configuration of your org. So doing that with our tool is pretty simple. You just drag and drop one of these blue icons, and then you could do a full metadata backup, or you could do a partial one where you would select what metadata you wanted to work with. So we're going to do a full one in this case. We're going to show you how that works. So all I'm doing here is logging in directly to my org. Again, it could be any kind of org, even a custom domain or OAuth if you have that. And then we move to the next step here, and it does the login to that particular org. And then all we have to do after that is click this Take Snapshot button, and that's going to take a full and complete metadata backup of the org. Now, we'll chunk it up and get around the limits. If you know about the Salesforce limits for big orgs with metadata, we'll take multiple retrieves and then stitch it all together into one cohesive backup so you can get a complete picture. And these could also be scheduled. So maybe, you want to have, a steady set of backups for disaster recovery. So we could say, we want to back up this org every Friday at 3 a.m. and we want to do that, every day maybe. So now this is going to, obviously back up the org on that schedule. Okay. And again, if you don't want to grab everything, you can always go and do a partial snapshot, which lets you go through each type of metadata and select what you want. So maybe you only want to work with a certain number of profiles, for example. You could select which ones you wanted and really build yourself a partial backup as well. Now, once you've got that backup of the org, we have a whole bunch of ways that you can really work with the profiles and the permission sets. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is right-click on one of these orgs, and here's where I can really get the full menu of everything that I can do with it. So down here in this section are all of the reports for visualizing the org, reports for documenting the structure of the org. We have a whole lot of ways to document your org. Optimization reports, those are for doing cleanup and technical debt, and security reports, which we'll be looking at quite a few of those today for your profiles and your permission sets. So let's start with visualizing. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to visualize the profiles in this org. So what this does is it puts my profiles down the left-hand column, and across the top, this puts all of the, in this case, field permissions. So I can quickly track down the security for any profile. Now, I could also do this for any part of the profile that I wanted. So if I wanted to look at tab visibility, or maybe I want to look at object permissions, I can just select it, and I've got a matrix that breaks down that security. So now I can quickly say, okay, my admin user, admin non-SSO has full access to the account, or my, clone custom profile here has create, delete, edit, read for the account. So quickly track down the security, right? Now, you may just want to look at a certain set of profiles while you're doing your work, so we allow you to trim it. So I could come in here and say, I just want to see, these 4 profiles, for example. And now I've got a very concise view of just those 4 profiles, so I could compare the security. Now, anytime you see a report or a matrix in Snapshot, all you have to do is right-click, and you can export it out. We pretty much let you take it out in any format you'd need, CSV, PDF, HTML, or Excel. So you can take these out for compliance or administrator reference with just a quick click. The other thing that we do is we do inline editing in this matrix. So this is a huge, huge time saver. If you're a company like the one that we were working with, the Fortune 500 company, they had 500 profiles that they needed to edit the security for in lots of different ways. And doing that piece by piece inside of Salesforce isn't, very labor intensive. It would be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clicks. But for example, I can go into my editing palette here. Let's look at, here's the account custom settings, custom object here. There's no access for these profiles. But I could come in here, select them. Maybe I want to go ahead and add a few other ones here too, for a few other objects or whatever. And then I can come and set the security that I want, apply it, and make those changes on the fly. So we can do inline editing right inside the matrix. That now writes it to our backup, which we can deploy back into the same org, or maybe from our staging org into production, whatever. So now that we can do this editing on the fly, it really saves us a ton of time having to do that in a piecemealed way inside of Salesforce. So permission sets work exactly the same way. We're just seeing permission sets down the left-hand column, and then in this case, object permissions across the top. And this, of course, is the big matrix where we can track down the security. So all of those same capabilities, trimming, editing, all of that exists for permission sets as well. So this is really looking at security from a profile, a permission set view, and being able to document it, understand it, edit it, those kind of things. The other thing that we do that's really useful, let me right-click here, and now I'm going to go down to our security setting now, our security section down here, and we're going to select this profile and permission sets report. Now what this will do is, on the surface, it does sort of what you saw before. I could click on any part of the profile like object permissions, and I could see that matrix, right? Same for permission sets. But at the bottom, we have something that we call combined security. That's taking a look at security by user and looking across both the profile and any permission sets that the user is assigned to see how they got to any security setting. So let's jump in and actually take a look at that. I'm going to click on Display Report here. So I'm running this for one user, Bill Appleton, right? But I could click Select Users here, and I could search for users by role, by profile, even by permission, by group, by permission set or permission set group, whatever I want. And I can add as many users up to 500 that I want over here in this selected users. And that would add them to this report. But for simplicity today, let's just stick with this one user. So Bill Appleton here has, we can see, right now we're looking at object permissions. Now, just to jump back here real quick, I could select as many things as I want to show here. I just selected object permissions so we could keep it simple. So here we have Bill's object permissions. So anywhere that a profile security is elevated by permission sets, we highlight that in green, because those are, potentially red flags or things that you may want to be aware of. So let's look at the account object here, for example. We walk you through the security of how Bill got there. So the first thing is he's assigned the custom standard user profile here, and that gave him only read and view for account. But then we have this permission set, which gave him read. We have this permission set, which gave him create and read. This permission set, which gave delete, edit, and read. And so the final security that we call combined security is create, delete, edit, read, and view. So Bill has full CRUD permissions to the account object, but if I just went and looked at his profile, it certainly wouldn't seem that way. And that could, this is for tracking down issues like Bill's deleting accounts. Why is he doing that? This walks you through it. And we could do this for any security setting across all of the profiles and the permission sets for any users that are in your org. So just a great way to document and understand security by user. And of course, just as with all of our reports, you can right click and export it out in a format, or just like our backups are, all of these reports are schedulable. So I could say, run this report every time there's a new backup, or run this report every Friday night at midnight and email it out to my administrator team. And you could send it out in all the different formats. You could email it. You could have it drop it in a folder. You could post it to Chatter. You could drop it into Salesforce content. So all of those options are available here. So lots of great ways to have these reports just running and then being shared to your team. So pretty useful there. All right, so we've talked about documenting and understanding how the permission set security is. We've talked about how to edit that, and we've talked about looking at it per user. Now, these were all things that this Fortune 500 company that we worked with was doing. They were looking, the first thing they did with their 500 profiles was they ran reports to understand them. How were they, comparing them, understanding where the security was set up, and understanding that really was the foundation that they were able to take from there. Then they started tracking down security issues by users using that report. So, documenting and understanding that structure is sort of your fundamental step. But we also give you all the tools that you need to make the changes much more quickly and a lot easier. And we saw how we can make changes to profiles and permission sets. But here, with a right click, I can go down to this security dialog, and we have this user permission assignments dialog. And what this does is really it does a bunch of different things. We'll walk you through it. So on the first thing, we have the Assign Permissions tab. This lets me literally look at all of the permissions and reassign them. So if I click on Bill, for example, I can see Bill's got that custom standard user profile, and he's got these permission sets assigned to him. Now, maybe I don't want him to have this particular permission set, so let me uncheck it and click Save, and I just made that change in the Salesforce org in real time. So you could do very rapid changes here. You can also multi-select users here to assign them to permission sets or profiles. And if you have, I'm working in a dev org that doesn't have permission set groups, but if you have some set up, those will appear right here as well, and you'll see those assignments as well. But one thing that's cool is that we can also, with the select users, we can decide which users we're looking at or working with, so we don't have to look at everybody if we're not dealing with everybody. We can also flip this dialog to look at it maybe not by user, but let's say I want to see it by profile, for example. So now I could click on any particular profile, and it's going to show me what users are assigned to it. And I could also look at this by permission set group or by permission sets, right? So I could come in here and look at any particular permission set and see what users are assigned to that and change those assignments. So you can sort of flip it to look at it by user, by profile, by permission set group, or by permission sets. So whatever makes sense for you to do your assignments, we make that easier for you. So the next tab here, the Create Group tab, this is where we can actually create permission set groups. So as we said, when you start assigning a lot of permission sets, it can get really complex. This org that we were looking at, they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of permission sets. And it was super confusing to understand it. So once they started getting their hands around it, what they really wanted to do was start grouping them, putting them into groups so that they could be assigned en masse when it made sense. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you could do that, right? You might group it by department or by release or feature. I mean, there's lots of, you kind of have to figure out your methodology there. In their case, they really came down to job roles and departments, right? Like there was a set of permission sets for the advertising group or the marketing group, for example. So this lets you build those groups really rapidly. So essentially over here, I could select any number of permission sets that I want to put together in a group. Over here, I could calculate the assignment. So it actually will calculate the list of users that all of those permission sets are assigned to. And then over here, I could create the group, give it a name, give it a label, give it a description. And then when I click that create group, it's going to create the group and do the assignment on the fly. So this is a great place to come and build those groups. And that's what this company did. They used this particular interface to start grouping things together once they understood it. So this is probably my favorite part of this dialogue here. This is our intelligent profile merging interface. So again, we talked about, especially in older orgs, people were creating a profile for every little security exception. And that means that you end up having lots of profiles per, too many profiles in many cases. In fact, I was working with a smaller company the other day. They had 300 users in their Salesforce org, and they had 243 profiles. So you could probably guess by those numbers that they had this problem, in spades. It was really an issue for them. So what they did, of course, one thing that you can do here is that you can select any profiles that you want to merge that you think would be a good target to merge. So let's say, in our case, the contract manager profiles are similar, so we should really put these together into one profile. So I'm going to select those to merge. Now I'm going to calculate, what this is going to do is calculate if we put all of those profiles into one base profile, how many permission sets with how many permissions would need to be created to maintain our current security. And we will actually calculate all of that and generate them right here on the fly. So it's going to take just a second because this is a lot of math. So here we go. If we turn these into one profile, it's going to create these 4 permission sets you see the number of permissions listed there. Now, doing that, figuring out how to do that yourself in Salesforce is, depending on your org, may be almost impossible, right? So over here, we can now come over and give that profile a name. And we can decide whether or not we want to delete the old profiles. So maybe we want to go ahead and clean them up right now. Maybe you want to leave them for, roll back if you decided you wanted to undo this change. And then when we click merge profiles, we can also, give it a description and other things that we need for the profile. Then we can merge it. And it's going to create that one base profile, create those permission sets, and assign the users all with one click. So this is a really powerful interface for simplifying your security model, but maintaining the same level of security. And it's moving you from too many profiles into what, of course, Salesforce wants you to be doing, which is handling, less profiles, more permission sets for exceptions. So just to talk a little bit about the rest of this dialogue, we have a whole bunch of reports that you could generate here, like show me all the users and what profiles they're assigned to. Show me the users and what permission sets they're assigned to. Show me, the permission sets groups and what users are assigned to them. So all these different types of reports that you can come in here and select and then go into the display report field and run them. You can tell this is a pretty small org, just a little dev org, but here's our report. And again, with a right click, I could take it out or quick share it with my team or have this scheduled so that it would run, on the fly. Okay, so we've talked about, documenting your profiles and your permission sets, doing editing of them, sort of understanding them. We've also talked about looking at security by user, and we've also seen the user assignment interface where we can really go in and tackle the actual work of getting things reassigned and put together correctly. So what I want to show you now is just a few other little things that we do with profiles and permission sets. Sorry about that. Give me just a sec here. I didn't mean to close that. That was not very smart. Let's launch that again. Excuse my messy desktop. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So what I want to talk about now is a couple other things that we do with profiles and permission sets that are pretty cool. So we talked about, how you could drag on an icon, connect to a Salesforce org, back up the metadata. But then you can connect any org to any org or to a code repo if you're working with one of those. And that enables a right click on the arrow. So our tool really works off 2 right clicks. You're either right clicking on an org or you're right clicking on an arrow. And from here, I could deploy metadata. I could do a quick deploy, a rollback. I could set up continuous integration. But we also have the ability to move data, but we also have a really great comparison engine. So we can compare all of the metadata in the org, but I want to show our special view for comparing profiles and permission sets. So what this is going to do is it's going to put let me expand this up so it's a little bigger. It's going to put the source org on the left and the destination org on the right. And this is a synchronous scroll where we can compare security for our profiles across the org. And just as before, I'm looking at object permissions, but I could select any part of the profile or the permission set. So green is new metadata, new profile. So there's lots of profiles in the source org on the left that aren't in destination. But when there are profiles in both, if there's a difference in security, we highlight that in red. So you can see here, create, delete, edit, read, view, create, delete, edit, read in the destination for this Contract Manager 2 profile, right? So we can scroll here and look at all of the changes across 2 orgs. Now we could again trim this if we wanted to trim it down to just look at maybe we want to just compare one profile across 2 orgs. Or we could put it in a single table view, which puts the source and the destination for each security setting side by side. That's the view that you want to export out. So this is a great report for compliance or for administrator reference or whatever that you could pull out very quickly. So this is great for comparing your profiles, and of course, all the same functionality for permission sets as well, for comparing them, across orgs. So you want to see, you're trying to get things set up in your staging, you're deploying it off to production. This lets you see those differences. Okay. All right. So let's talk about one last piece here that's relevant, and that's just a little bit about our deployment engine and how you could deploy profiles from org to org. So if I right-click here, I'm going to select Deploy Metadata, and what that's going to do is take us into our deployment interface. So the first thing we do when you start a deployment is we look for any changes that have happened in the org since we took our backup. Well, this is a dev org. I haven't done a backup in a while, 5.13. Here's all the deployments that have happened since I did that. But not only can we look at deployments, but we can look at the setup audit trail. So tons. So this catches, changes maybe that your admins are doing directly in the org. I can actually see what every change is. So this is a real-time way as you're moving into a deployment to know if there's been changes since you took your backup that you may need to update your backup to capture. And of course, I can do that right from here. I can just select Take Source Snapshot, and it would update my source snapshot, and I could obviously do the same for destination. So this captures a lot of those stepping on toes issues where you take a backup, and while you're, like with change sets, you take a backup, you upload the change set, someone runs into the org and, makes changes to that metadata, then you push it down, and then, you're out of sync. So it avoids those kind of issues. So the next step here is that we can create a job list. It remembers my last job list here, so I'm just going to clear this out. But it does a diff here. So this is, green is new metadata, red is metadata that's different from org A to org B, gray is identical metadata. So from here, I can quickly deploy anything that I need by building a job list. So I could, come in here and grab my account object, or maybe I want to, drill down here and just deploy a specific field, for example. Well, that same idea works with profiles as well. So I could come down here to profiles. Here's all my profiles. So I could create a completely new profile with all of its parts and pieces, or I could expand it here and drill down and do micro deployments. So maybe I just, want to come in here and, for this particular profile, deploy these 2 field permissions. So it's a very flexible deployment engine. Lots of tools. It can grab all the related metadata to anything, sort of like what you do with change sets. It could grab, you could come over here and multi-select or do a select all and say, add all the missing metadata or add all the different. So very quick ways to build a job list. We also do deletes. So if you need to delete things out, it'll do the deletes and then run the deployment. So you could do those swap and replace. And then we come in here and we can actually run that deploy. Lots of things we can do here. Of course, testing code quality. We actually do code quality and code coverage both. Lots of little tricks here with the deployment that we're not going to cover today. But one thing I did want to show you is this remove sparse permissions. So there's an issue with profiles that when you gather them from the metadata, revoked permissions don't show up. So this means that when you deploy it over to the next org, those permissions are on for the profile by default rather than off. So we actually have a checkbox here that will detect revoked permissions and will correctly deploy them over. And as far as I know, we're one of the only tools that really handles this correctly. So that's another really powerful piece is once you've got all your profiles and things put together, we can correctly deploy them from org A to org B. Okay, so of course deployments could be scheduled. You can set up CI, all that kind of stuff. So I hope that this was, informative for everybody. What we really have is a complete org management tool. It handles your release management, it handles data migration, it handles org cleanup and optimization. But as we saw today, it's also a very comprehensive set of tools for managing profiles and permission sets, really top to bottom. Okay, so thanks everybody for sitting in. With that, let's jump back over here to my presentation. And I will set up our slide here that has our contact information. So if you would like to give us a buzz or get a demo so we could really dive into the tool for your needs, or send us any questions, if I could get there. There we go. Let's leave it there. There we have it. There's our contact information. So with that, let me look in the chat here. I think we probably had some questions come in along the way.
Couple of questions. Thank you. It was very, very helpful, and I learned a few things. I watched a couple of webinars of Metazoa, and every time when I join, I learn something new. So thank you for that. I got a couple of questions. First of all, people is asking how they can try and what is the pricing model.
Yeah. So we price it per user, which means you would buy a license for an admin or a developer. That's $3,000 a year for an annual license for an admin or a developer. And that includes unlimited personalized training. You get assigned a personal trainer who will train your team. And that also includes support. So everything's all included with that. And obviously we volume discount. If you're buying multiple licenses, we have volume discounting available, discounts for nonprofits. So that's the pricing model. Yeah. Okay, great. So can I save a backup on AWS? So you can actually. When you do a backup, we have and after that where you can have a backup go somewhere like a shared network drive or whatever. But a lot of our customers actually spin up Snapshot to run in AWS and store their backups there. So yes, you can store backups with AWS. We covered the pricing structure, nonprofits. Do we have a trial? Yes, we do. We have a 14-day trial. We do full training for the trial. So you can go to the App Exchange, get our tool there, and then we'll set up a training session for you, or a couple of training sessions to get you up and running with whatever you want to test out, and then give you a couple of weeks to try it out with your environment. And then another question, can I compare profiles from the last two backups to find if some changes have happened over time? Yes. In fact, we do org monitoring. We didn't really talk about this, but you can take regular backups, like on a schedule, maybe daily, for example, and then you can look at that, compare any backup to any backup for any metadata. Could be profiles, could be permission sets, but it could be changes to objects or page layouts or fields or anything. And we can let you see changes in the org over time. And you could also, of course, go back to one of those backups and restore. So if there was a change that happened that you didn't want to happen, you could go back to a backup where you had the metadata correct and deploy it forward and fix that problem. So yeah, we do fully support that. How can admins convince executive teams what a time saver this is? We'll be glad to help you with that. We have a really great ROI document that has lots of quotes from lots of our customers that talks about the time they've saved using this tool. And that's really what this is. At the end of the day, all these things are things you could do manually in Salesforce, but things that might take hundreds of hours, you could do very rapidly. So it really is, at the end of the day, a productivity tool. But if you reach out to us, just shoot us an email. We'll be glad to get you our ROI doc. And of course, we're glad to meet with your executive team and talk about how this tool really helps admins out. Okay, and then is there something like a trailhead module where an admin can wrap its head around it? So right now we do full training, so we will train you. But just to give a little glimpse into the future, we are working with Salesforce right now to build a trailhead module. So that's something they've now opened up to partners, and we are going to be doing that. So we will have a full trailhead certification for Snapshot in the future. So it's something you can have a badge for, and as an administrator or developer, you can say, hey, I'm Snapshot certified. So that's something that we are working on that's coming down the pipe here pretty soon. I think that was it. Gosh, thanks everybody. Thank you, Rakesh, for the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining, and have a great weekend.
Yep. Enjoy, everyone.